The new Canyon Spectral on CFR is available in two models, a limited version and, well, I guess, an unlimited one. And a quick glance over the component parts of flashing lights and gold parts would confirm that yes, they're both Superbikes. The question is one Superbike better than the other? Now, a quick way to compare both bikes is actually on the Canyon website. But what does that actually mean? Well, it means you can compare directly what each bike is made of. No, I don't mean materials, because both these bikes are CFR and they're also both in black, although they're actually both different blacks, deep space or endless black. Right, the important point to understand is regardless of price or componentry, what Canyon have done here is build two Superbikes which have got long range and are also lively. Now, a lot has been spoken about lightweight e-mounted bikes in the past 12 months, but what makes a bike lively is good suspension design and also good geometry. And that's what they've done with these bikes. And there's some really cool features, such as the tilted motor, the way they've got the centre of gravity down into the bottom part of the bike there. And if you look on the other side here, some good sort of ports to keep out the water. So lots of cool features, which I'm going to go into in more detail a bit later. Right, the first part in our search to see which is the best bike, or indeed is one bike better than the other, is the comparison of batteries. Now, obviously, they're both battery-powered bikes, but actually one bike has many more batteries than the other, which we'll see in a minute.
Now, the CFR bike comes in at 8,599, whereas the limited bike at 10,499. Remember, both bikes are the same frame, just a different paint job.
Right, let's begin our battery count up then on the CFR Limited. And we've got a button battery in both the shifter and the seat post shifter on the axis here. We've got flight attendant battery on the fork, flight attendant battery on the shock. We've got the reverb axis battery here. We've got a derailleur battery here. So, oh crikey, how many is that so far? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, and of course, the 900 watt-hour battery in the down tube. On the CFR, on the other hand, we have got one. We've got the 900 watt-hour battery in the down tube. So the question is then, is this bike higher maintenance because it's got more batteries, or is this bike high maintenance because you've, in theory, got to adjust the cables? I would say it's a draw. At which point, my colleague behind the camera disagrees with me. He says that it's far easier to pull a cable and replace that than remember to charge batteries every day. Of course, other things we're trying to compare and contrast, such things as AXS over XTR, electronic versus analog. What is better? Well, there's simply no answer, because in as much as the axis shifting is light, precise and instant, maybe on super technical, noisy, rocky terrain, my bigger hands, bigger fingers might actually be more suited to the longer levers of this particular Shimano XTR. Now, to be honest with you, I really do not think that whether you ride Fox 36 or RockShox Lyrics is that much of a deal breaker. They're both incredibly good suspension units. But there might be other personal things, such as maybe XTR braking over SRAM braking. Well, me personally, I do like the shape and feel of a Shimano lever. But for other people, like I said, it's a personal thing. They might well prefer the feel and shape of a SRAM lever. Now, this whole comparing and contrasting can actually be laced with contradictions. I mean, take the wheels. Both the Canyon Spectral on Limited and the Canyon Spectral on with the Shimano setup have both got carbon wheels. You've got DT Swiss Hybrid 1501 HXCs on the Limited bike and a Reynolds setup on the XTR bike. Now, there is one key difference between the two wheels, and it's not the fact that they're made by different companies, the fact that the DT wheels has got a lesser spoke count up front, which you could argue, or you could even prove, might actually
give you a smoother ride when you're going through super beaten up rocky or rooty terrain. At the same time, if you're riding tighter, smoother single track, then possibly that Reynolds setup might be quicker in that scenario. So it really does depend. It depends on rider weight and terrain.
Now, when you look at the materials of the both bikes, they are exactly the same frames, and it's only the colours which, as I mentioned earlier, are different. The big difference actually in some of that £1,800 between the CFR and the CFR Limited is actually you're looking at probably £500 worth in the seat alone. We've got the SRAM reverb AXS on the Limited and the Fox transfer on that bike. Now, I think that this setup is actually marginally quicker and obviously far neater in terms of the front of house and the fact that you can pull that seat and put it in and out really easily. So you've not got the cable adjustment to deal with on this bike. So I think myself, now Matt might disagree with me, that this setup does actually have the edge, but as I mentioned, you do pay a price for that. Now, the next big difference between the bikes is actually the front of house, what many people call the cockpit area. Now, on the Limited bike, you've got a one-piece bar and stem, whereas on the CFR, you've got separates. You've got a separate handlebar and stem, and it's also aluminium on the CFR, and it's carbon fiber on this bike. I actually really like the shape of this bar and stem, especially as this is a 155mm travel all mountain bike. So I think this is a good position for when you're climbing, and also it's pretty neutral for when you're descending too. But some people I've talked to actually don't like it. But in terms of a clean cockpit area and the position, for me it works. For other people, it might not.
The handlebar is a massive subject now. Some people don't actually like the integrated one-piece bar and stem that Canyon produce, whereas I absolutely love it. And I think the reason for that is the fact it's a good balance when you're climbing and descending, and for an all-mountain bike, I think they've got the numbers right. At the same time, that's not to say that the combined handlebar and stem on the Shimano XTR bike isn't good, because I think possibly in more of a downhill-oriented scenario, that could be the better option. But we're talking marginal gains here.
Suspension is where the really big differences are in the two packages. Do you want electronic or do you want a traditional setup? The Canyon, remember, is the first eMTB to offer RockShox flight attendant. What's the best, you might ask? Well, in some ways, both are set and forget. And in other ways, you'll always be changing settings due to the weight of your ride or indeed the conditions. Now, on the CFR bike, we've got the fantastic Fox fork and shock on this bike. And if you know your suspension setups, it's pretty much set and forget. Obviously, you might want to change that depending on whether you've got a backpack on or indeed the type of riding you're doing. And one thing to understand is that the lockout on this bike, or the compression adjust, has been done manually on this little lever on the top of the shock there. But it's all changed when it comes to flight attendant. Now, flight attendant is a world apart from the traditional setup, and this is the first eMTB to feature it. I've actually done a quick video which shows how to set up flight attendant. It's super easy, but the key part to understand is that when you ride a flight attendant bike, the suspension automatically adjusts to the type of terrain that you're riding in. So there's actually three sort of presets or three settings on the bike, which are open, pedal and lock. So for example, if you're going along a tarmac road, the bike will be in a kind of lock position. If you transition onto a forestry track, it'll go into pedal mode. And then when you kick up into a super technical rough climb, it'll actually go into an active mode, which means you can get grip on the rear tire. And obviously that works the other way around too when you go from flat fire road into a super technical downhill. And it does it, I promise you, it does it absolutely instantaneously.
Here's another interesting scenario. Pedaling along a flat fire road and all of a sudden you're dipping into some super technical terrain, and that's where flight attendant really does activate instantly. It goes from lockout to open literally instantaneously, and then back onto a smoother terrain, and locks out again, so definitely works in that respect.
The juicy question then, AXS or analog suspension? Which one is for you? Well, AXS automatically adjusting to ever-changing terrain does mean that you'll achieve balance without having to get off and alter the dials or lockouts. It works particularly well for the higher speeds that e-bikes cover ground. We're not saying it makes for faster riding everywhere, but it certainly saves faffing. The bottom line, I guess, is that technical climbing and descending both require well set up open suspension, and you'll need to get dialed in for this regardless of it being electronic or analog. And in this respect, the top-end Fox 36 on the CFR is every bit as capable as the AXS Lyric on the limited bike.
It's the whole thing with you when you're comparing and contrasting things such as handlebars and wheels and things like this, then I think it's a case of you, the rider, adapting and how quickly you can adapt to that. It's not that the bar and stem on this bike is better than the bar and stem on the XTR bike. It's just a different feeling, and in different scenarios, one might have an advantage over the other. But I tell you what, I just love riding this Spectral. Such a great all-rounder. That's the main thing about this bike. It is a superbike.
So, electronic suspension versus the traditional setup, is one better than the other? Do you need it? That's a huge subject which will actually rumble on and on. And something actually I cannot guarantee you that there will be a significant difference with. No, but something I can guarantee you, and this is the big difference number one, is that there will be, and there is, a bigger difference between how these bikes handle with a 900 compared to a 720 watt-hour battery than there is between the component differences between the two bikes. So to give you a bit more insight into that, with the 720 watt-hour battery, both bikes, the Limited and the CFR, are definitely livelier with the lighter battery. But difference number two, and that is there is a bigger difference between the handling of both bikes in two sizes than there is between the handling with different component builds. Now, I've ridden both these bikes in a size large and also a size extra large. And I'm 6 foot. Now, I'm actually used to riding downhill bikes with a wheelbase of around about 1270 millimeters. And I really like the balance that a longer bike gives you, not just on the downhill, but also on the climbs as well. And if I was to pick between the two bikes, I would actually go for the XL bike over the L bike for its all-round capability. So to conclude, I think the XL is roomier and doesn't have as much body shifting going on when you're doing technical climbs. So there you go, folks. Two important differences between the two bikes, and they're not to do with the componentry, they're to do with what battery you fit and also what size bike you choose. Don't forget it. Now folks, in as much as they're both superbikes, now as Doddy rightly pointed out to me, some of the component parts are very much consumables. So such things as the derailleur and the cassette and the shifter and the chain, you're going to change anyway. So I think when you're looking at a superbike, you need to bear in mind, you know, the cost of replacing some of those parts. I mean, tires as well, but then again, the tires on both bikes are similar. So yeah, lots to think about on superbike versus superbike, that's for sure. Yeah, so I'm pretty much unbudged in terms of the sizing. I am definitely an XL sizing. I like the balance on the descents. I love the fact that you don't have to move around so much on the climbs because of the long wheelbase. Yeah, it's definitely XL for me. Okay, folks, what about the differences in the other departments? How about the drivetrain for starters? Of course, we've got SRAM versus Shimano. The biggest difference actually is the fact that there's a 1052 cassette on the limited version and a 1051 cassette on this bike. Otherwise, we're looking at the same 4 pop brakes, except we've got SRAM brakes on this bike and we've got Shimano XTR on here. Tyres the same. The wheels are actually different. There's DT Swift's hybrid wheels on here. There's Reynolds wheels on here. There is a slight difference in weight, but the biggest difference actually is the fact that the DT Swiss wheels are 28 spoke front and rear, and I think that gives a really good feeling when out on the trail, whereas the Reynolds wheels are 36 front and back. Elsewhere, Shimano EP8 motor, same size cranks on both bikes, same seats on both bikes, same tyres. We've got an Assegai up front, we've got a Minion DHR2 on the back. So lots of similarities actually in terms of componentry. It's funny, isn't it? It all comes down to a simple preference between whether you prefer to ride with electronic suspension and electronic gears, or simply go the traditional method of manual shifting and manual suspension. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the biggest difference isn't actually in the componentry of the two bikes, it's actually on such things as the size bike you choose and also what battery you choose on either bike. And I think that as much as the 900 watt-hour battery gives you an insane amount of range, I think I did a ride in turbo mode where I did 5,600 feet of climbing, 26 miles, 2 3/4 hours on the 900 watt-hour, and I did, I think, 4,500 feet of climbing on the 720 over an hour and 3/4. So big difference in range, obviously different types of riding for different battery types, but also the fact that when you ride the 720, it's definitely a livelier feel, but more than that, you need to set up your suspension differently for the different battery types. And one final thing, folks, don't forget to subscribe to EMBN for loads more e-mountain bike content. Great way to help the channel. Give us a thumbs up if you'd like this video. Clearly, there's going to be a ton of comments about Superbike versus Superbike. But one last thing, the weight differences between the limited and the unlimited. 22.85 kilos, 22.75. Thanks for watching.